Okay, and welcome back to the next part of painting the blue hoods that you see on the Gitz that I have painted before. And today we will continue with the Git that we have started with, and we have applied Sote green as a base color and shaded with staggered on scale green in 2 steps. And in this video, the first paint that we will be applying is a mixture of roughly 1-1 between Sote green and Beheroth blue. So we're going to continue where we left off, but move more towards the highlights. And essentially, what we do, nothing has changed so much yet, except that we're sketching still and placing our first highlight color. And where do we want the hood to be even brighter? And so we'll go over the model. I notice that I need to thin down my paint just a little bit more and apply it. One of the things that is very tempting, I notice at this stage, is to apply this color, for example, all over the top of the hood here. And because you say, well, that's directly under the light. Well, technically that part is true, but it will become very homogeneous if you apply it over the entire top here. And you'll actually take away from the final effect from the color that you want the hood to be. Because truly what we're doing is we're trying to paint a hood that looks Sote green. And by doing that, that's why we started with Sote green base, and now we're gonna shade and highlight that Sote green. But of course, one of the essential parts of us wanting to have our hood look the same color as the Sote green paint is that we have it somewhere on the model. So when highlighting, again, it can be very tempting to go over all of the Sote green, but keep in mind that it is not always the best thing to do. Okay. Here you'll notice, and this is what I'm continuously referring to, that when we apply the highlight color, it looks much more messy than it did when we were applying the shade colors. And that is again because blending together highlights nicely, or lighter colors in general, is just more difficult. So at this point, there's a good chance that even though you're doing exactly the same as before, that overall the effect looks more messy. So keep that in mind and don't let it scare you. And just go over the model and see the details you want to pick out. This is the first highlight, so not the final highlight. So what I do here, the part over there, I could have skipped it, but I think it adds a nice little detail, and so I will do it at this stage, but I'm fairly sure that I'll skip over it when we go to the final highlight. You can also go, if you are going to stick with this video tutorial, then I can already tell you that we will be glazing, and when glazing, we will darken down almost all of the colors. So even if you go a little bit higher, that is fine. That's actually advisable to go a little bit higher on your highlights with the prior knowledge that with glazing we will bring it down a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to go over these parts a little bit to try and at least get some of the coverage in these areas. Like that. Again, just to make sure that the color is about right. This is still not with the intention of blending them together. There we go. You'll notice that with each step, starting with the base is generally the most work, but then each step from the base, either towards shadows or highlight, tends to be a little less work. So this step, will take us some time, and then again for the final highlight, that will take us probably a very little time. Here underneath his ear, that pops out. Here there's a little ridge around his ear. If you skip all these small details, you probably get away with it, but if you do decide to paint them, that does add to the effect. So if you skip them, that's fine. It won't take away from any of the effect we're doing, but painting them will add to the level of detail of this model. Okay. Here at the bottom, you could skip this and leave it at Sote green. I like the somewhat higher contrast on the hood, so I'm just gonna add some of that towards the bottom. Here you see a little ridge. This might be, because I haven't noticed it, that might be a little too much because we haven't really worked it up with the Sote green, or I haven't. But you could utilize it and then pick it out. I actually think it might be a mold line that I should have just gotten rid of. So perhaps just ignore that. As you can see, or hopefully you'll notice something, that I tend to be somewhat chaotic in how I go about the model, placing these first highlights. I move the model around a lot. That's simply because I'm looking at it, and whenever some of these spots they pop for me, and I say, hey, this is a spot where I want to highlight, I just apply it. So I know some people prefer to go very methodically, so they want to do all the highlights in one part first before moving on to the next. I try to do that in these videos as well, simply to have it appear a little bit more structured, especially if you're not so familiar with this way of painting. But it's not very natural for me, so if it looks a little bit erratic, it's very possible, and I apologize. Around the face, try to be careful. You see, I painted a little bit too much in between the lip, and there it looks as if there's no separation anymore. That is something that I will fix, because that does take away from all the paint we have in the face. All right. Here, this ridge, I want to have with the highlight color here at the bottom of the hood. You could skip this part because it's fairly low, but it's no biggie if you decide to give it a quick coat and define it a little bit. Here on this side again, it's not so easy to get in there, so try to be careful when painting there. I might hold it at a little bit of a difficult angle for the camera. Generally, you want to paint, not paint too much while holding your model upside down, because then when you turn it right, you'll actually notice that the effects can be very different. So where I can, I try to paint using the model the right way up, but you'll also see in a lot of these videos that I don't always manage to do that. So just a general piece of advice. All right, that goes there. We've already highlighted a little bit here. This part here, we see this small dent, so we're not gonna go all the way up. Just leave a little bit of that Sote green showing through. And as I said, just work your way around the model. Here I paint it down a little bit because it will catch more light here. And try and place some of those highlights. And try to also focus on what you think will be the most prominent placements for these highlights. Even if you don't manage to get them all, That is fine, because you'll also remember from my earlier videos that being economic with highlights also makes them pop when used, if you're not using them everywhere. And some also start with more easier to start with more obvious highlight placements, such as this ridge. It's very obvious that it catches more light because it's been bent that way. Here, there's this ridge. We know that ridges catch more light, so that we know will catch light. Here, this one. On top here will probably catch more light. So by starting off and doing it in such a way that you start with the things that you're pretty sure of, that are easy to determine whether or not they should receive a highlight, that will help you in the long run as well. Because then you can just put the model away, and you can start by being economical and then decide if you want it brighter or if you missed anything. And this is a part of the process, I believe, that you'll also need to develop some confidence in it, that things will work out, you know. Just start painting on some highlights, put the model away, look at it, see if you missed anything, go back and forth, add some more highlights, bring some highlights down a little bit because you went too high. That process, the trust in that, over time you will find the correct placements, and or notice the placements where you shouldn't have done it. That takes some experience, it takes some time. But once you have tried it a little bit and you have gained some of that experience and trust in this process, you'll also notice that this stage, I actually like it. I actually like this stage almost as much as blending it all together or glazing to get the nice finish. And this is what I mean here. This looks a little bit weird here at his shoulders, so I don't know if I want it as bright as I have what I have now. So I'll just drag some of this mix together with some Sote green from my palette and bring that in. And this is a prime example of what I said, that sometimes you just go over it again, you look at it and you notice that it's not working, or that you're not satisfied with it. If you're not satisfied with it, try to answer the question as to why. Why are you not satisfied? And if you can answer that question, then it's easier to fix. And if your technique is decent, if you're generally content with your painting technique and you're still not really satisfied, then very often it has to do with color or the placement of highlights, etc. So here, actually, I quite like it. So we have quite some contrast here, and we'll still need a final highlight. But I am continuously debating what I want at the bottom here, because this will be brown, so that will not really add a lot of color. So I might just add a very small, subtle highlight all the way here at the bottom. Not too much, but just to get a little bit more definition in there at the bottom. And there we go. And with that, again, I think I am content with the placement of our first highlight color. So guys, stay tuned and we'll continue directly with the placement of our final highlight color. So see you in a bit. Hello guys, and welcome to this final part. I guess not the final part for the entire hood, but the final part where we'll be adding the colors that we will use to create the effect that you see on the hood. And right now I'm going to use almost pure Baccarat blue. Why almost pure and not just Baccarat blue is because I like to have some of the base paint, even if it's just a hint, coming back. Also in my shadow colors, but especially in my highlights. Even though the effect is often negligible, and even if you'd use pure Baccarat, you probably get away with it. I always like to have some of that original base color show through. So this is basically Behrot blue with just a drop of Sotek green in it. And this is really the final highlight. And you'll see me here, I'll feather in over the edge where there is the natural curve, and I'll do the same here, and I'll follow the line in the middle. So that's where I want my final highlight for the hood to be at this part. And then you'll see that even though the hood here, we said at the beginning, is quite a large flat area that catches a lot of light. Once we start blending it together like that, it adds just a lot of detail to the hood. And I think it looks nicer. So right now, in this step, you can just go over and add this final highlight to the places that you wanted. And again, if you try to be a little bit economical, the stronger the effect will be where you decide to use the highlight. Again, this is a difficult spot for me to get to, the edge on this side of the hood. So I might have to hold the model, holding the model. It's somewhat of a difficult angle. But there we go. You could add it here at the bottom. I might do it just to help it pop. Because this actually, where you could skip that highlight, it helps to pop the concealed face. So to make the effect that we've created there even stronger. Okay, let me just follow these ridges here. Again, this is still about placing, and the next step will be to blend them together. Okay, and now we go to the top. I want it there, a little bit on that side. Here's this little ridge, what do you call it? I don't know what you call it, but this little piece here, then I want to touch with Behrot. As I said, this little dot here, I'm not going to. You could, I notice now, get away with still doing it, but this should be fine. Here, on the top of the ears, we haven't done it in the previous layer, and probably should have. Just want to add a thin line, as well as here at the bottom. Again, this is not per se where it catches the most light, but it defines that area a little bit, and it makes the ear more noticeable. And so it adds for me to the overall effect of the detail that you will see painted in the model. These ridges here, they're very light, and especially that one. This one a little bit less, but I want to have those well defined, or at least that one of them that we just painted over there. That one is very important for me to be very light. And you'll see that the rest I leave for what it is. And move to this side. And define some of these shapes. Again, this is not an easy spot to get to. Let me see how I can do it. So this is where we get to the point again where, oh, it's actually quite loose on his base, where I'm going to paint some of it upside down. And again, try where you can to avoid it as much as possible. And if you paint upside down, it's always a good idea when you turn the model back up to check if it's still painted in correctly, because I haven't figured out why it is yet, but if you do it upside down and you flip it back up, it's not always the case that you've painted in what you set out to paint. Okay, so you see that will need correcting, but for now, for the highlight placement, I like it. It's good enough. Let's go to the back and do the same. Go over the same process. And also, why these steps get easier is, of course, because you eliminate more and more parts that you will know that generally could never get this paint anymore, because everything that you painted Sotek green and left black, that got a different color. So that could never receive any of this final highlight anymore. Then everything that you that is Sote green, you went over a select area of that with the 1-1 mix between Sotek and Behrad. So right now we have this mix, and realistically only ever the placements of the last highlight mix could possibly get this color. And then even here, not all of them should get it. So in that way, it can also help you to build it up slowly and to make the choice of where you want to place these highlights a little bit easier. Actually, I think we're already quite done. Here the contrast is already quite high, and here it's okay that it's much higher, but we'll be spending some time bringing them together. And here this is one of the areas. This ridge, I think if we add the highlight there, that would be nice. And here on top, this could be a little bit lighter. There we go. And then we have it in the transition, quite nice as well. Here you see this ridge, that will be where we will follow with Behrad. And with that, actually right now I'm gonna stop with this highlight color already and tell you that this will be the colors for the blue hood. So what we will do next is actually to bring these colors together. So we're gonna blend them together a little bit before moving on to the glazing. So stay tuned for the next video, guys. Hello guys, and welcome back to the next part where we'll be painting or continue to paint the hood. And before we go on to glazing, in this phase we're actually gonna start and blend some of these colors together that we have before going on to glazing. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna identify some of the transitions and just smoothen them up. So I know that here on top of the hood is Sote green, and I started going over that with the first highlight. So what I'll do now is I'm just gonna grab some of that first highlight, mix it together, again roughly 1-1 with the Sote green that we have on our palette, and start going around the edge and kind of go back and forth with my brush and try and smooth that transition a little bit. You'll notice me make these weird movements with my brush. That is to help the transition look a little bit more natural in the long run, because if you do brush strokes from one direction continuously, that will it will start looking more like a pattern. And we know that the human eye is great at recognizing those. So try to be mindful of that, try to steer away from it, and that will help you blend together colors more easily. So instead of making it too long, I'll probably either speed it up or cut it out, because at this stage you can spend as much time as you want, really. It just depends on how smooth you want these transitions to be before going on to glazing. So I'll just do it here over some details to show you what I would go for generally, and then finish the rest off camera as to not make these videos unnecessarily long. So as you see, it's difficult for me to say exactly what color I'm using where, because it depends on what colors I'm blending together. But it'll take roughly the color that in the transitions that you want to smoothen over, and then where you see a very clear distinction between where one color meets the next, we're just gonna try and make that a little less apparent. And this method, I don't know, I always call this feathering. I don't know if that's actually what this method is called. But as you see already, I already quite like the hood. You can still see that there's differences there, but even just a couple of seconds or a minute or so of applying some extra colors, And already I'm beginning to see a more and more natural transition from one color to the next. Okay. And as you see now, I went a little bit too far. Oh, I dropped my brush. And that happens as well. That is no problem. This is all part of this step where you just bring these colors together. And that's why I said sometimes this process is a fast one. If you happen to do it correctly at every stage, but very often you just have to go back and forth a little bit and try and improve the smoothness of these transitions, or to smoothen these transitions. Now I see I took away from it a little bit, so I'll just go back to the lighter color and work it in. Here at the around the ridge, I'm not entirely satisfied yet. The other part of the hood, actually, this part I'm already quite content with. I think that is good enough for me before we go to glazing. Here, this side, this could be a little neater, or a little less, made a little less softer, those transitions between those colors. So that's what we'll do. I'll do that there. And from this side, already that helps a little bit. Now from this side, and with that applied, I think I went over a little too much. So we'll just go back and bring that color back. Again, going over it just as many times as necessary until you are satisfied with how smooth these transitions are. And again, when we get to see, now I went much too bright, so now we do need to go back to a little less obvious color here. But the whole point is why you would spend more or less time at this stage. If glazing is a technique that you're really comfortable with, and you much rather do that than this, you can spend a little less time here and just instantly go and glaze these colors together. But always be warned that glazing is a technique that once you use it, if your transitions are smooth, let me put it like that, if your blends are, the smoother your blends are, the less layers of glazes, or the fewer glazes you will need in order to achieve that final effect where you get that you want, where you get almost that perfect transition from one color to the next. And you said, as I said in the beginning, this one part of the hood actually went really quick. And now here I mentioned that this ridge is causing me some grief. So there's a high likelihood that at some point I'll say, well, okay, so I'll continue to other parts, and this one particular part I'll just remember. And when we come to the glazing part, I'll just make sure that I remember this part and spend some extra time on that transition. Okay, and with that, that's actually what I'll do, because I'm still not entirely content with the transition. So I might go try one last thing. And if not, I'll just move on to other parts first. And then we can always return to this later, or just glaze it together. There we go. Oh, 1 second. All right, let's continue. Now I'll just go straight to very thin down Sota green and actually see if that can help me. So I'm actually picking a paint that is further away from the transition color, but since it is a layer paint Sota green and is heavily thinned down, it might actually serve as a sort of in-between glaze already to help me smoothen that transition. Of course, there's as you might have seen, there's quite a lot of water was in there. That is not going to be helpful. So as you see, I'm just dragging it towards the shadows, because I know once it's in the shadows, the transition, it'll be much easier to smooth that together. All right, and you can just repeat this process all over the model, and then we'll continue to glaze everything. So I'll see you once I've done it all over this model, guys. See you in a bit. All right, guys, welcome back to the final part of painting the hood. And I can't get it all in screen probably, I'll try. So I have a palette and I've prepared some glazes, and in this video we'll glaze together the hood and finish it with that. So diving straight in, I've explained in previous videos what glazes are, but essentially this is Naggaroth Night diluted with water, and this is Incubi Darkness diluted with water. And both are diluted to about a 1.6, 1.7 ratio, 1.6, 1.7 paint to water. And so what I'll do now, I have both on my palette, and let's start with the Incubi Darkness. So I'm gonna grab some on my brush to get it off, most of it, and I can always check by putting it on my thumb and dragging it on. You see there's almost nothing there. So now what I'm going to do is, these are dark colors, so I'm going to shade towards, or I'm going to glaze towards the shadows. So we're going to drag the paint towards the darker parts, away from the lighter parts. And because it's such diluted paint, you'll probably barely notice an effect after just one glaze. But over time, by applying multiple glazes, you'll notice that the contrast between colors is reduced, because it's a very, very thin layer of paint put over all the layers that are underneath. So what happens is, if I put just a little very thin layer of paint over it, then the colors that were under it, they come together a bit more. At least the contrast is reduced. And by doing this just long enough, will then reduce the contrast to such a degree that at some point the blends, they will look, or the transitions, they will start to look as if they were near perfect, or if you're very correct in applying all the layers before as well as these glazes, they will look as perfect blends. And this will just go back and forth, and we'll drag it towards the shadows. And right now we use Incubi Darkness. You could also use a Bad and Black, but I've also put on some what did I say? Some purple, just to show you that it can help to add some variety when glazing these things together, these colors together. So really, one glaze is not enough to get a strong effect, but for the purpose of the video, we'll just go to the purple glaze and do it pretty much exactly the same. Keep in mind, one thing that is important is that you let the previous layer dry, or the previous glaze dry, before you apply the next one. Also, a good thing to note is, at some point, if you start using this technique more and more, you'll notice that how much water you need to add kind of depends on the paint. So I know Games Workshop paints quite well, because I have basically always painted with Games Workshop paints. So I kind of intuitively know the right ratios to use for the glazes that I want. And what I mean with that is you don't need to have the perfect ratio, but if you're unsure, just add some more water, because the more water you add, the thinner or the more diluted the paint will be. So the only downside to that is that you'll need a lot of glazes before you start noticing an effect. And if you add some more paint, well, then the effect will start to appear a little faster. Anyway, I might show that because I barely see any effect from the purple. So, and that is not okay. I don't have the limitless amount of patience that some people do. So we'll just add some more purple to the existing mix. You can see, just get some purple, and I just mix it in with this. And then we go back. As you notice, already some of the highlights that we've applied, they are toned down quite a bit. But luckily, we can always go back and reapply them if we so wish. So at this point, if you notice that your highlights are suffering from the glazes you're applying, try to avoid going over them too much. So really go towards the deep shadow so that the color settles in there. And there we go. We'll just work our way around the model until we're happy. And in the end, what I did in between this video and the previous one, I worked most of these colors together, and I spent some more time doing it, so this video wouldn't be so long. So actually I think we'll be satisfied, or I'll be satisfied with the result from these glazes in just a couple of glazes. But once you get this point and you look at your own model, you'll be very, it's much easier to decide how often you should go over, or whether it's worth to stop or continue. One thing to do while glazing is every now and again, put your model away, look at it a little bit from a distance, and see if you're not glazing away too much of the effect that we've spent so much time working towards, so that you don't glaze away too many transitions or too many highlights, which usually is not a huge problem, but I notice here already some of the highlights, they are less visible, so perhaps this is a good example of where that could be the unfortunate case. Going to the back. Oh, you see there I applied too much, and then it starts serving as a wash as well, kinda. And here you see, now it wasn't diluted enough, and you immediately see the downside of what will happen if you don't dilute it enough. So the upside is that it's faster with more paint particles in it. The downside is that the effect will be present much sooner, like this. And then you'll actually see where you put over the glaze. In some areas, if it settles, like in these recesses, that's fine. But it's not something you want on the flatter areas. See, because this now, it looks flatter on the video, but here it already looks like we've lost quite some contrast. So here we're gonna continue, and we'll just stick to the purple for now. Here I've decided that in this area, it's hard for me to go over it. So there I'll just go back and add that highlight again that we put in at the start. Okay, and then at the front, I think we're done. So I'm gonna just add some more of that here at the back. Focusing a little bit more down, as to there's always a way that you can also use to increase the contrast again, just make it darker on the bottom half while avoiding the top half a little bit. And there we go. And actually, I'm quite content with the way he looks now. And just to get you an impression, because there's still many things that you could adjust, but if we zoom out a little bit, you'll notice that he actually, I actually quite like the effect that we've achieved. So I hope this helps, and I hope you can achieve the same effect on your models with these hoods, if that is what you like. So let me know if you enjoyed it and if this was helpful, and we'll see you in the next video.